back to another edition of Cannabis in Canada with Jason Wilcox, coming to you from British Columbia, Canada. Once again, coming to you to talk about the MMAR PPL DPL Coalition Against Repeal. This is a national coalition. We're growing, and growing large in numbers. And I'm not going to get into any of the real legalities, other than as this movie goes forward. I am going to get into my personal take and my personal standpoint, not the coalition's, and certainly not any legal opinion, but rather my personal opinion. But first, I'd like to get into what's proprietary at this point, is that people go to the MMAR Coalition Against Repeal.com website. And there's a link right on the home page. Once you sign up there, click on Impact Statement, and that'll take you to a digital form. That digital form, first and legal last name, email address, everything else is optional, you know, if you want to put it in. Then your impact statement down below. It can be 1 paragraph or 10 pages. All we need to know is, how is this going to impact your life? Is losing your genetics going to impact your life? Did you invest a lot of money in becoming a co-op or a designated grower to help medical patients? Are you a medical patient that invested lots of money to grow for yourself and conform to city bylaws and conform to medical marijuana access regulations that are currently in effect, not the proposed ones? You know, so this is the stuff that we have to ask ourselves. Do you feel you might be impacted because you lose a therapeutic value to your plants, you know, to working with your plants? You know, how is this going to impact your life? Is it going to impact your life that you might have to pay $12 a gram or more, you know, for genetics that you don't even know if they're going to work for you? You have to order them from a company through the mail system. We don't even know how the packaging, shipping, timelines, anything works. And this all remains to be seen. So please, my friends, right now, the good thing is we have a lot more time than originally thought. You know, we can file this injunction any point in this year. Ideally, we would like to do it before March 31st. I know that. But right now, we're seeking a legal opinion and making sure that we have a legal route to take, an option to go with. And I know that Mr. Conroy has an opinion, and that opinion needs to be verified by a federal outfit. And you know, at that point, we'll see what happens, and go from there. An injunction, so that the viewers understand, an injunction would then freeze some or all of the proposed regulations until such time as a judge has a chance to charter scrutinize them during a constitutional challenge, which of course will be quite costly, and donors would be very important in that respect. The one thing I know from my 20 years in working as a patient advocate and working within the different fields is when medical patients ethically unite and show that they're not going to lay down to something, the general public support them, the doctors support them, because you know, really it comes down to an issue of autonomy, a right to put in your body what you want to do, and or what you want to put in your body, which is really what Terry Parker won back in 2000. He never won really the right to use cannabis per se. That was what was granted, but he really won the right to autonomy, or what amounts to the right to autonomy, was to, again, put into your body what you feel will medically assist you. And in this case, it was cannabis. And the health minister was ordered to give him a Section 56 exemption and an option to cultivate, rather than a right under the charter, which is why we're back here today doing what we need to do. One thing I'd like to touch on, just in case, because I know I'm going to lose y'all in the first 8 minutes here, that aren't going to stay in for the details, on a personal take. So again, impact statements, proprietary, MMAR Coalition Against Repeal.com, or you know, hit us up with an email. All the contact information is there. My mobile number is there. Give me a call if you'd like. Anything that you can do to help us out would be appreciated. We have regional reps from coast to coast that can also take in impact statements and forward them to the applicable persons to get them filed with John Conroy and Company, so John can continue to form the best possible legal opinion to move forward and seek further you know, action to certainly protect the rights of the 30,000 Canadians in question, 30,000 plus. So it's something we definitely want to look at. I'd like to talk about the hydro and grow stores as well. It's very important that we look at you know, some of you here in BC know I've been going around and showing and doing my best to inform what's going on with the grow stores, and it's quite interesting because a lot of them, and I shouldn't say a lot of them, there's a lot of different people that didn't necessarily look at the fact or even know that personal production was being phased out, let alone that there was only 51 licenses going to be tendered, you know, in the first year. I mean, this in the first 2 years. So this directly is going to impact their business. Big business, these big guys aren't going to go to these little stores and buy their ULA and CSA approved ballast. They're not going to go buy their charcoal filters, their multi-spectrum bulbs. So, you know, their grow tents, all the stuff that's been designed for the indoor personal cultivator and for safety is now, you know, all the flip switches, you know, everything, you name it. Those are all going to be bought wholesale, big time, you know, and it's certainly not from the small stores. So we stand to lose jobs, we stand to lose business, we stand to lose a lot. I'd say 30% of business for some people, and I've heard from some store owners they may even have to close their doors if this was to go through, because some of them invested a lot of money thinking that the new program meant that there was going to be, you know, like a 4,000% increase in cultivators. So of course they would buy a lot more stock. And here they are now, and there ain't going to be a lot of legal cultivators that I know of that are going to go buy any new equipment as long as it's up in the air as to whether personal production is going to still be allowed in Canada. So this is where I call out and I plead on behalf of the coalition to all companies, the head shops, the everybody. If you're selling anything, or if you're related to the cannabis culture as we know it today, look into how you can help. Whether it's spread the word, let them know how to do it, help them to direct them to the coalition or to John Conroy's, you know, to let them know this is how we're going about this. This is the route to try and stop this from happening. And this is where we're going to really get into the movie, because I wanted to get that out. Impact statements and funding. It's a legal case. I mean, the true reality of this, $250,000 to $500,000 case. So I mean, let's just cut to the chase. Let's look at the reality. We're taking on the federal government of Canada. We're taking on big business, special interest groups, pharmacopoeia, you know, so on and so forth, and all their little friends and policies and procedures and police and fire and everybody else. Okay, we're public safety threats. You know, our compassion clubs are in some people's eyes are being deemed as organized crime syndicates. You know, heaven forbid we actually help somebody while the federal government's in disarray. It's quite the insult, to be quite frank. But you know, I strayed off a little bit on that issue. We've covered the hydro stores, so let's get into a little bit about. Okay, let's get into the impact statements. Let's get into what's really going on here. You know, people over and over I'm hearing about, and I understand this, y'all. First, actually, before I get into that, I gotta say thank you, and I respect y'all. Thank y'all to the regional representatives, you know, across the country who stepped up and done what they're doing, and the new people who've come aboard. You know, we're growing. we're like a plant that was put down, you know, and it started off as a seed and now it's sprouted, and we've got a few internodes. You know, people may not necessarily see us right now, but when we flower, they're going to know who we are. I believe we're growing in that capacity. And it's an exciting time because it's a grassroots movement, and it's now taking governance to be a national organization potentially. You know, this is something that is long overdue for medicinal users in Canada. We fought numerous cases to get the present program in place. 20 plus case law files, I believe, have been established under the charter to get the old program somewhat reasonable, you know, and now they've come out with a whole new program citing public safety being fire, mold, and gangsters. And I brought this up in other movies. Okay, fire, the stats aren't there. They don't support indoor agricultural grows, nothing. There's no fire stats. Even with Health Canada, for legal cultivators, for 26,222, I don't think 5 or 6 fires are going to hold much water statistically. Bypassing electricity, similarly, 5 or 6 cases, whatever. I don't know the exact stats. I'm just saying they're certainly not in favor of the majority, or even close to you know, a minor minority for that matter. So really, and then you look at the mold. So what would we need to know about mold? Well, growers know that the air quality in the grow room is better than any other room in the house. So really, we need an expert witness, and we need some mold studies, air quality studies, an air quality specialist. Get up on the stand and tell the truth. You know, that's what I like about the justice system. It's about the law, the facts, and the truths. Facts and stats, not fear-mongering, speculation, and hearsay that the government's done so well. I see that. I've heard about the Health Canada letters. I haven't actually read one yet, but I see that they're implying that this program is enacted. This program will start March 31st, and it will run concurrent with the current program being the MMAD, Medical Marijuana Access Division, and their regulations, the MMAR. They're going to run concurrent till March 31st of 2014, at which time the MMPR will come into full effect. It's at that time, should everything else fail, it's at that time that we could look into class action. It's something we can't do until they're in full force, and that needs to be understood, the difference between a constitutional challenge, you know, an injunction, versus what we can do in 2014. What we can do now, if we can all unite and we can do what we need to do, you know, and that's directionally focus everything to the coalition, get the impact statements in, the donors kick up the money, put it in there. It's all invested interest. You know, this is about Canada. This is about being a patriot to our country. This comes down to the cannabis plant. I'll break this down for you how I break it down whenever I try to explain people or to people. For me, I see this as very simple, okay? Bill C-10 was first implemented. You gotta remember, we fought that. Those cannabis activists in Canada, we know. It was Bill C-26, we defeated it. Bill C-15, we defeated it. Bill C-10, we fought it vigorously. And they slipped it through while Parliament was out or something. I can't remember how they exactly got it through. But either way, you know, they got Bill C-10 in. Mandatory minimums for a victimless crime in Canada. You know, Americans are repealing mandatory minimums, Canada's instituting them. Good job, Harper. But here nor there, that Bill C-10 effectively puts cultivators like myself, who've been growing legally for 10 years, in a position where they're saying, we're going to take your license away and you cannot grow these plants anymore. And if you do, then you're facing, you know, in my case, for my plant count and for what I need for my medical needs, would certainly have me do penitentiary time under the new laws that have been passed and are in force now. So I suggest that you maybe Google Bill C-10 and look up what the laws are around cultivation if you don't have a legal license. And you know, and of course it has to constitute organized crime, it has to constitute trafficking. But for those of us who've been around and kind of been through the rigmarole of court, we know that police don't just charge you with cultivation, and they don't just charge you with possession. It's possession with the intent to traffic, or cultivation with the intent of a traffic, with or without scales and baggies. It can be debated all you want, but the reality is you have to prove it in court that you weren't going to traffic, in my own opinion. Again, these are all my own opinion. I just wanted to make sure that we got into this and looked at all aspects of what's going on. Another thing that's important is looking at sorry, going back to Bill, sorry, the triangle, I'm getting myself confused here. Okay, so we got Bill C-10, okay, personal production they're going to phase out, right? Now here is a trump card. I think Canada is going to legalize. Now, if they phase out personal production, and then down here they got Bill C-10 that prevents many people from even considering personal production anymore because they're not willing to go to jail. You know, they're not going to get a slap on the wrist when mandatory minimums are in effect. So then nobody, when Canada legalizes, nobody, it will be like Washington State, will be allowed to produce cannabis. So all y'all out there that are fighting for legalization, that think this is just a medical marijuana fight, do your homework. It's not about just the 30,000 patients. It's about the future of Canada. It's about the patriotism of this country. It's about our culture. Fundamentally, it's about our plant. Okay? Take the plant out of the culture. I don't see too many people showing up for 420 to celebrate a cigarette pack of genetics that are mailed to you or that you bought from a pharmacy, you know, of genetics that you don't choose. You know, if that's what we've all been fighting for, I retire. You know, I just know that I've got 2,000 friends that agree this is wrong. You know, and I know there's a lot more of y'all out there. We just need to get our voices united. We need to be heard. You know, and the only way we can do this is by channeling it all one direction. You know, and that one direction is the Federal Supreme Court of Canada through John Conroy and through the Coalition Against Repeal. You know, we're here to protect your license. This is urgent. This is no game. You know, if they phase out personal production, it'll be a lot harder to get it back later. Now, if we were to go and get an injunction and win a constitutional right to cultivate what we consume under Section 7, you know, in accordance, you know, with one, barriers to access, want to make sure that there is no barrier to access, and two, is it a fundamental right to autonomy, you know, to actually cultivate the very medicine that you're going to actually personally consume. And the reason I say that is because I can still make beer, I can still make wine for personal consumption. I can't divert it, but I can have it for personal consumption. But cannabis, we can't. On the fire, mold, and gangsters argument, I find it almost discriminatory and inflammatory. So those of you out there that are looking into human rights cases, I would look into that issue, because it's very discriminatory and inflammatory to say that only medical cannabis growers are the mold and fire starters. You know, they're the only ones bypassing electricity. They're the only ones doing all this bad stuff. They're all the gangsters and the criminals. I find that very discriminatory, because I know the people, and the medical patients and activists certainly aren't criminals. They certainly aren't tied to organized crime. So it's very, again, it's very discriminatory, because there's 100,000 plus agricultural permits in this country for hobby growers who grow plants, who grow exotic herbs. They either sell them to the florists, or they sell them the Safeway, whatever. They use the same equipment we use. Their plants don't spontaneously combust, neither does cannabis. So the fire's gone. They don't get mold. How come we do? And why are we gangsters? Is it just because it's cannabis? You know, I'm not going to use your word marijuana. Marijuana is actually a prohibitionary word. Mary Jane. It's reefer madness 101. That's what it goes back to. It was meant to scare the Americans in 1942 when they took it out of pharmacology. And they decided they were going to ignore the LaGuardia Commission back in the 20s. You know, I mean, this stuff's old. And this is the whole thing. When they repealed alcohol, they did the same thing. They repealed it. Big billionaires opened up big breweries. That's why we only have about 5 of them. And they had all kinds of liquor stores. In my own opinion, that's what they're aiming for with cannabis. And as we wake up to this, I hope that when you wake up and you do your homework and you say, wow, or you read about it in the paper and you get that eureka moment, you know, file your impact statement with us, please. Jump in, get involved, join the forces. You know, there's a medical coalition and a medical coat of arms ready to go. And we're formed and ready, you know, and we're taking in troops. That's the only way I can put this. You know, funds and troops, funds and troops. What does it take to launch a military campaign? Funds and troops. Well, this is a coalition campaign for medical, but we still need funds and we still need troops. And I know it's unfair that we as medical patients need to step up again and do these impact statements and do all this stuff to fight for a right that was established over a decade ago. However, it's just what it is. It's a North American business plan. You know, the DEA was involved in our medical program. Why? Has to do with the treaty. A lot of backdoor stuff. I mean, this is a very big issue, because if they take the cannabis plant out, and I know I'm repeating myself, but think about this, please, my friends, all of y'all, brothers, sisters, you love the plant, okay? Understand, the government is trying to seize the plant so that it is in the hands of 51 companies that can grow it and distribute it in the model that they choose, the genetics that they choose, for the safest plant, safer than the coffee I sit here drinking. This coffee is more addictive than caffeine, than cannabis. You know, cannabis has never killed anybody. You know, nobody goes home, smokes a joint, beats up their wife. You know, nobody goes home and has some vaporizer or has a cannabis cookie and beats up their wife. A million people gather for 420. There's never been a riot. But yeah, you have a rock concert and some alcohol and boom, you got a riot. But yeah, you can still make that alcohol at home. Like the safer of the three, the government's saying no. Well, why? That's the next question. Why would they do that? Well, common sense, we all know. It's a $300 billion industry. That's what it's about. And to me, I'm not about the money. I don't care. I don't give a rat's ass about the money aspect. I care about whether patients can afford their meds, whether patients are going to get their meds, and whether their human rights are going to be stomped on in the process. That's my concern as a patient advocate, not only for myself, but for the 30,000 people that this coalition represents. You know, we're here for you. You know, and all we can do is ask for you to be there for us. Because only through unity, community, and building an army can we take on such a multifaceted opponent, you know, that's well prepared and ready to go. The one thing that we have is it's like a David versus Goliath battle, you know, and I use this analogy that, you know, we kind of got John Conroy as a sling, we got the Charter of Rights and Freedoms as a rock, you know, and we got the coalition as David. And we know who Goliath is. So I hope that we have the same sort of ending to the story. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave this at. You know, I just wanted people to really stop and think about some of these things. Stop and look at what's going on. Because this comes down to our culture. There ain't going to be no head shops with cannabis shirts, t-shirts, nothing like that. You know, if there's no cannabis plants to take pictures of, you know, there's going to be no culture. The head shops, the cannabis dispensaries, the cultures, the vapor lounges, all the stuff that we worked for to try and better the medical community, and we've done it. We've supported one another without any federal support because they've been in disarray for over a decade. And then they dare have the audacity to blame the medical patients for their cost overhead when they couldn't even run the program right. Why do we go from 8,000 growers at the beginning of this year to 26,000 growers? What happened the previous decade? You know, I often wonder why the numbers don't go up. Health Canada, by their own estimates, is 1.7 million medicinal users of cannabis in Canada. Why do we only have 30,000 licensed after 12 years or 13 years of our program? You know, and then to actually try and blame it on us. It's our fault that you couldn't get people licensed. Maybe it was a 30-page arbitrary application. Maybe it was the pictures and all the crap that people had to go through, the criminal records checks that DGs had to go through. And now you're taking it a step further. You know, the federal government, when I say you, the federal government, taking it a step further, taking the plant out of the general public's hands. I don't think that's warranted. I don't think it's reasonable. It's certainly not combustibles. It's not a fire starter. It's not a mold collector. Otherwise, the 5 or 6 plants I have, and you know, the many friends I know with 30, 40 plants in their house would be mold collectors as well, because you know, mold comes down to the plant and the climate control and the climate issues. Now, indeed, is there going to be a small fraction of people that may have that happen? Absolutely. Or is there going to be a small fraction of people that are going to crash their car tomorrow? Absolutely. Okay, it's a reality. But we cannot blame the majority for what a small fraction of the minority does. On that note, this is Jason Wilcox, and we'll see you in the next update. Cheers.